It was a Friday night, and I was finally home alone for the first time in months. My parents had gone out of town for the weekend, leaving me in charge of the house. At first, I was excited. I could watch all the scary movies I wanted, eat whatever I liked, and just relax. No rules, no curfew, just peace and quiet. The house felt huge with nobody else around. I could hear the faint hum of the fridge and the occasional creak from the wooden floors as the house settled. It was comforting at first, but as the night went on, the silence started to feel a little too thick, like it was pressing down on me. After a while, I decided to make some popcorn and settle in to watch a horror movie. It was one of those classic slasher films where the killer stalks the victim in their own home. I laughed at how predictable it was, but deep down it was starting to make me feel uneasy. I shook it off and told myself I was just being paranoid. About halfway through the movie, I thought I heard something outside. It sounded like footsteps. I paused the movie and listened. Nothing. Just the wind, I guessed. But then, there it was again. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching on the gravel of the driveway. My heart started to race. I grabbed my phone and went to check the front door. I peered through the peephole, but there was no one there. I even turned on the porch light, but the driveway was empty. Maybe it was just an animal passing by. I tried to calm myself down and went back to the couch. I resumed the movie, but my mind wasn't focused on it anymore. Every little noise in the house started to sound suspicious. The wind blowing against the windows, the tree branches scratching the roof. Even the hum of the fridge seemed louder now. Just when I started to relax again, there was a knock at the door. I froze. It wasn't a loud knock, but it was enough to send chills down my spine. I muted the TV and waited, holding my breath. Knock, knock, knock. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. Who could it be at this time of night? I checked my phone, no missed calls or texts. I crept towards the door and peeked through the peephole again. This time, I saw a figure standing just outside, shrouded in darkness. They weren't moving, just standing there. I stepped back, my mind racing. Should I open the door? What if they needed help? But what if it was someone dangerous? Knock, knock. I decided to speak through the door. "Who's there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. I waited, my hand hovering over the doorknob, ready to turn the lock if I needed to. "Hello?" I called out again. Still no answer. Then I heard something else, a faint whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it was coming from the other side of the door. My heart was pounding in my chest. I wanted to call the police, but what would I say? Someone's knocking on my door and whispering? It didn't sound like an emergency. Knock, knock. This time the knocking was louder, more urgent. I stepped back from the door, fear gripping me. I decided to call my parents, even though they were miles away. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number. Before I could hit call, the knocking stopped. Silence. I stood there, phone in hand, listening. The house felt even quieter than before, like the air itself had frozen. I cautiously approached the door again and looked through the peephole. The figure was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief, but my hands were still shaking. I tried to convince myself that it was just some prank, maybe a neighbor messing around. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I double-checked all the locks and windows, making sure everything was secure. I decided to skip the rest of the movie and go to bed. I figured if I just went to sleep, everything would be fine in the morning. I was wrong. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of creaking floorboards. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but then I realized it was real. Someone was inside the house. My heart dropped. I stayed as still as I could, listening. The creaking was coming from downstairs, moving slowly, like someone was trying to be quiet. I reached for my phone and dialed, my hands trembling. The operator answered, and I whispered that I thought someone was in my house. She told me to stay on the line and stay quiet. She said the police were on their way. I stayed in bed, trying to breathe as silently as possible. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear them coming up the stairs, one slow step at a time. My bedroom door was closed, but I hadn't locked it. I heard the doorknob rattle. I squeezed my eyes shut, clutching my phone, praying that the police would get here in time. Suddenly, There was a loud bang from downstairs, the sound of the front door being kicked open. I heard voices shouting, followed by heavy footsteps rushing into the house. The police had arrived. They found me in my room, shaking and terrified, but safe. They never caught whoever had been in the house. All they found was the back door unlocked, as if someone had let themselves in. I never stayed home alone after that. My name is Jake, and I've always been comfortable being home alone. It never bothered me. In fact, I usually looked forward to the peace and quiet. But that all changed one night, and now I can't shake the feeling that something's always watching me when I'm by myself. It started on a Friday evening. My parents had gone out of town for the weekend to visit some relatives, leaving me in charge of the house. I was 17, old enough to handle a couple of nights alone. I didn't think twice about it. After all, it wasn't the first time I'd stayed by myself. The night started off like any other. I ordered pizza, played some video games, and watched a few episodes of my favorite show. The house felt a little too quiet, but I didn't mind. I figured it was just because I wasn't used to it. Around 10 p.m., I decided to settle in and watch a horror movie. I always liked watching scary stuff when I was home alone. It made everything feel more exciting. I turned off the lights, grabbed some snacks, and started the movie. About halfway through, I heard a faint noise coming from upstairs. It sounded like a door creaking open. I paused the movie and listened, but the house was silent. I shook it off, figuring it was just the house settling. Old houses make weird noises all the time, right? I pressed play again, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that crept over me. Something felt off. I tried to focus on the movie, but every little sound the house made seemed louder than usual. The wind outside, the occasional creak of the floorboards, it all felt too real, too close. Then I heard it again, a soft creak, like someone was walking around upstairs. My stomach tightened. I muted the TV and sat there, straining to hear. The sound was faint, but it was definitely coming from upstairs. I wasn't imagining it. I grabbed my phone and checked the security cameras we had installed around the house. The outside ones were all clear. No signs of anyone near the doors or windows. But I didn't have any cameras inside, so that didn't do much to calm my nerves. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to check upstairs. I couldn't just sit there and ignore it. Maybe I'd left a window open, and the wind was making the noise. Or maybe a tree branch was scraping against the side of the house. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and headed towards the stairs. Each step I took felt heavier, like the air around me was thickening. When I reached the top of the stairs, I paused. The hallway was dark, but everything seemed normal. All the doors were closed, just like I had left them. I started down the hallway, checking each room. First, my parents' bedroom, nothing. Then the bathroom, empty. I opened the door to my room and everything was in its place. Finally, I reached the guest room at the end of the hall. I hesitated for a moment before turning the knob. The door creaked open slowly, revealing the empty room inside. Nothing was out of place. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I was just being paranoid, I thought. The house was old and old houses make noise. I headed back downstairs, feeling a bit silly for freaking out over nothing. I plopped back onto the couch and unmuted the TV. But just as I started the movie again, I heard it, a faint whisper coming from the top of the stairs. Jake. My blood ran cold. I froze, my eyes darting to the staircase. I hadn't imagined that. I had heard my name. I stood up slowly, clutching the flashlight, my heart racing. Jake, the voice whispered again, this time a little louder. I felt a lump in my throat. I forced myself to take a step toward the stairs, then another. My hands were shaking as I shone the flashlight up into the darkness. The beam flickered slightly, casting long shadows on the walls. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Silence. I took another step, then froze. At the top of the stairs, I saw it, a figure, just barely visible in the dark. It was standing in the hallway, its face hidden in shadow, staring down at me. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away. I couldn't move fast enough. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. I ran to the front door, yanking it open and stumbling outside. I didn't stop until I was halfway down the driveway, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I turned back to look at the house, but the figure was gone. The doorway stood empty, the house as quiet as ever. I never went back inside that night. I stayed at a friend's house, too scared to be alone. My parents didn't believe me when I told them what happened. They said I was just imagining things, that I'd let the horror movie get to me. But I know what I saw. I know that someone, something, was in the house with me that night, and I'll never forget the way it whispered my name. My name is Alex, and I've never been the type to get scared easily. I've always liked being home alone, especially at night. The quiet was peaceful, and it gave me time to think. But after what happened last weekend, I'm not sure I'll ever feel that way again. It started like any other weekend. My parents had gone out of town for a quick getaway, leaving me in charge of the house. I didn't mind. I was 18, and it wasn't the first time I'd been left alone for a couple of days. I had plans to hang out with some friends on Saturday, but Friday night was all mine. I made myself a quick dinner, then settled in to watch TV. The house was quiet, just the way I liked it. I flicked through the channels and finally landed on a movie, a horror movie to be exact. I always found it fun to watch scary stuff when I was alone. It added a bit of excitement to the night. Everything was fine until about halfway through the movie. That's when I heard it, a strange, soft tapping sound. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to catch my attention. I paused the movie and listened. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the back door. I got up, a little annoyed. I figured it was probably just the wind, maybe a branch hitting the door. I walked to the kitchen, where the back door led to our small backyard. I turned on the light and peered through the glass. Nothing. The backyard was empty, except for the swaying trees and the usual clutter of outdoor furniture. I checked the lock on the door. It was secure. I shrugged it off and went back to the living room. I pressed play on the movie, trying to get back into it, but the tapping started again. This time it was louder, more persistent. I paused the movie again, feeling a little uneasy now. I grabbed my phone and decided to check the security cameras. My parents had installed a system a few months ago, and it covered all the entrances to the house. The feed came up and I cycled through the cameras. Front yard empty, side of the house nothing, backyard still empty. No signs of anyone or anything near the back door. I told myself it was just the wind. It had to be. I turned off the camera app and went back to the couch, determined to enjoy the rest of the night. But the tapping didn't stop. In fact, it started to move. It wasn't just coming from the back door anymore. It was coming from the windows too. One by one I heard it, tap, 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 moving from the kitchen to the living room windows. Now, I was really freaked out. I grabbed a flashlight and walked to the nearest window. The blinds were drawn, but I could see the faint outline of something on the other side. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the cord to pull them open. Taking a deep breath, I yanked the blinds up. Nothing. Just the empty front yard illuminated by the streetlight outside. No sign of anything unusual. I checked the other windows, but everything was the same. The backyard was empty, the side yard was quiet, and the front was as still as ever. I sat back down, feeling a mix of frustration and fear. Was my mind playing tricks on me? Was I imagining things? I wasn't sure anymore. Then I heard it again. This time, it wasn't tapping. It was a soft whisper, so quiet I almost didn't hear. Alex. I froze. The whisper came from the hallway, just beyond the living room. My heart started to race. I stood up, my legs trembling as I walked toward the hall. The light was off, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist in the darkness. Alex. It was clearer this time. Someone, or something, was calling my name. My throat tightened, and I grabbed my phone, ready to call someone, anyone. But before I could dial, I heard the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the upstairs. I hadn't been upstairs since my parents left, and I knew all the windows up there were closed. No one could have gotten in. But the footsteps kept coming, louder with each step. They were heading toward the stairs. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. I was about to bolt for the front door when the footsteps stopped. I stared at the top of the staircase, waiting, barely breathing. That's when I saw it. A shadow, tall, dark, and still, stood at the top of the stairs. I couldn't make out its face, but I knew it was watching me. My phone slipped from my hand, and I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the coffee table. The shadow didn't move. It just stood there, silent, as if waiting for me to make the first move. I bolted for the front door, fumbling with the lock in my panic. I threw the door open and ran outside, not stopping until I was halfway down the street. I looked back at the house, half expecting to see the shadow in the window, but the house looked empty and still. I didn't go back inside that night. I ended up staying at my friend's house, too shaken to explain what had happened. When I returned home the next day, everything seemed normal. No signs of a break-in, no strange noises. But I knew what I had seen, what I had heard. Something was in that house with me, and it was still there, waiting.